Please join me in welcoming Santiago Siri of Democracy. All right.
Thank you, Lane. Thank you, Crypto NYC, for pushing me to this night. I was really looking forward to this. And let's hope we make a revolution tonight. It won't depend on me. It will depend on what we do with the ideas that we take from here and how we push them forward to society. So we're probably all here to talk in the middle of a context that has to do with the significant rise of cryptocurrencies and blockchains. But I would like to make an introduction today to the topic from a different angle, from a geopolitical angle. And when we look at this chart, people immediately think about Bitcoin. But the reality is that that's a chart about the US dollar. And I'm going to start today talking about the US dollar and the divorce between money and state that we're witnessing across the whole globe as more people adopt these technologies. So the story around fiat currencies that we get told that in 1971, Richard Nixon emancipated the US dollar from the gold standard, it's only half true. That's part of the story, but not the whole picture of what was going on in the 70s. It's true that the dollar quitted the gold standard, but at the same time, this was going on. Nixon was meeting with the Saudis. This picture is from 1974, and basically told the Saudis, either you make every single oil deal in US dollars or check out Vietnam. And the Saudis agreed. And the consequence of that is that the dollar went from the gold standard to the petrodollar, which is, in other words, an energy-backed currency. And the business of the US dollar was monopolizing the accounting of energy based on fossil fuels. That is the whole story of what was going on with the US dollar. And this is a very interesting thing to notice. Look how happy Vicky and Henry were there. Okay, first joke of the night. This is something really very interesting to follow, because when you start looking into the dollar this way, then you start realizing, boy, these have a very high maintenance cost. Basically, when any country decided, I'm not going to make oil deals in US dollars, I'm going to use my own stuff, or Saddam Hussein in 1990, basically, boom, they get airstrikes and they get killed in 1 week. When Gaddafi tried to do the same thing and started making oil contracts using euros, the consequences were instant and lethal. So there is a very high cost to maintain the status quo of the dollar. And we need to weight that when we talk about also the cost of maintaining these new emergent networks and technologies we call blockchains. So then this happened, which is, if we're talking about bubbles, let's talk about all the bubbles. After the subprime crisis and the massive fraud of banks selling mortgages of mortgages of mortgages, the Federal Reserve printed in a very short span of time almost $1.8 trillion. So if you want to compare the size of crypto market size, of market capitalization of crypto, this is a good reference to check if markets are actually smart about numbers. So, you see throughout the history of the dollar, when it went post-gold standard, that it had this quantitative easing technique, then snafu, and they printed out of the blue almost $2 trillion. So people started noticing this. People actually started noticing that there's suddenly an influx of dollars out there that does not make any sense. And for instance, China and Russia started making oil deals and energy deals in a different way. China started buying gas from the Russians, and they told the Russians to make every single oil deal in renminbi, the Chinese currency, and the Russians were willing to accept because the Chinese are backing the renminbi with gold. And Russia, for some reason, is the largest hoarder of gold in the world. So they are now colluding or trying to beat the historical monopoly of the US dollar in the energy markets. And that's a very big change. And in this case, these are nuclear powers. Both these guys, they have nukes. So you cannot mess with them in a direct form. You can mess with them in proxy states like Syria and North Korea. But directly, no way. So things are starting to change. And the dominant position of the dollar is no longer the case. Satoshi noticed it. Satoshi, on the very first Genesis block of the Bitcoin blockchain, encoded in the information in that block a headline, I think it was from a British newspaper, specifically mentioning the huge bailouts that were being made to rescue the banks. Like, if Satoshi is a politician, he's a very smart one, because the very first block in the blockchain has a political statement in it. And I really believe that any relevant blockchain-based technology, by definition and by the nature of these networks, will be geopolitical. This is a technology that is coming to change no longer the cultural layer of how we engage as a society, but the institutional layer. And we get the chance to work with a new canvas, to rethink the rules of the world, to rethink what to understand about the inner gears of institutions. We have this chance as a generation. And I think this is the most exciting thing coming up with blockchains. This slide shouldn't be here, but check this out. It was in the MIT servers in 1996. Pretty much describes everything that happened with Bitcoin. This is a chart that I like when looking at the price of Bitcoin. This is a chart that really, puts Bitcoin in the y-axis instead of the US dollar. And this is saying a lot about this big change. There was a tweet last week, someone tweeted it, it was very good. Bitcoin is not the bubble, it's the pin. And as we, this is I understand that this is a very traumatic piece of news. I come from Argentina, and in Argentina, we've been through stuff like this our whole life. We saw hyperinflation, and suddenly our money was not worth the same during the morning than it was during the afternoon or the evening. So you had to rush to the supermarket to buy things fast because they were going to be more difficult to buy them with the same amount of currency within the 24 hours. Then we pegged our currency to the US dollar. We had that dollar standard in our economy in the 90s. And when we were able to meet our debt, our international debt, then the government confiscated the funds, and the ratio of 1 peso, $1 was no longer there, so people lost their savings. So we've been in Argentina through a lot of traumatic financial events of very large scale. And the sensation, looking at many of the dynamics ongoing with the disruption of these technologies, when you contrast them with traditional currencies, look in many ways very similar, including the weirdo president. True, and it's like we had a lot of those. So the maintenance cost, as we have been discussing in the media and social media, and many headlines have been about this, is energy. There have been many titles of articles and headlines talking about how expensive it is to maintain the Bitcoin network, and how it takes almost the amount of energy of the island of Ireland, or how a Bitcoin transaction, once it gets verified, is the cost of a household during 1 week. It's true, there's a big cost regarding the maintenance of these networks. But the fascinating thing is that Bitcoin, Ethereum, and all the other blockchains as well, gives us almost perfect resolution in regarding the amount of energy that they are using. If I want to look exactly at the amount of energy that it costs to maintain the security of the US dollar or any fiat currency, it's impossible to calculate because they print it, you don't know where it goes, there's no blockchain where you can trace the transactions, and you really don't know. The cost of maintaining an army might be part of the cost of maintaining the status quo of those currencies. But the security of blockchain-based network is not based on force, it's based on cryptography. And cryptography is an intrinsically defensive form of security. So the fact that with these networks we are actually understanding on a global scale how much energy we're using, we can start to look what are those energy sources, says a lot about the kind of potential these technologies have to fight the big global challenges that we're going to face on this center, mainly climate change, and everything is pretty much related to energy. So accounting energy is the name of the game. Accounting, whatever currency wants to be the world's reserve, has to be the best currency at accounting energy and giving us a very clear understanding how we are using that energy as a humanity. So an interesting story is what's going on in China with the miners. Actually, in China, energy companies, because they are in still underpopulated cities, which are very big, but they still don't have enough demand for energy, the energy companies usually produce an excess, a surplus, which they don't end up meeting the market demands, so it's wasted. And what the energy companies are doing with that otherwise wasteful energy is mining Bitcoin. And the increasing price in Bitcoin in the markets is helping some of these energy companies actually use Bitcoin as a way to subsidize energy costs for their population. So it's a variable that they are playing with, and a battery that helps them not to waste any energy that would otherwise be wasted, and start bringing, connecting energy companies into a global economy, bypassing even the Chinese government. So we could argue that maybe Bitcoin is kind of a Trojan horse in Chinese territory. So, but there are still wars, and these are nerd wars, which are super fun to watch. If you look into the army side, it's like the strangest people you can imagine. And they're all on Twitter and on Reddit. But we've seen the rise of these conflicts and these attempts to control the protocols happen this year. There was a successful fork and there was an unsuccessful fork. The successful fork was Bitcoin Cash. You probably saw about this in August. Craig Wright and Yihan Wu and some of the folks related to the miners in China that are Roger Ver, they argue on the idea that they need to increase on-chain scaling, so that benefits the miners, that benefits whoever is able to control the hardware. Is the CIA entering the room and swatting us? They're going to swat us, and they're coming for me. I get more and more paranoid the more I spend time in this industry. I'm not kidding. I don't know why you're laughing. Why are you laughing? Okay, so Bitcoin Cash is the fork that benefits China. We could, speculate on whether there is actually a state actor behind that fork. Then there was the corporate takeover of Bitcoin, which was Segwit 2x, this idea of doing the best of both worlds and making a fork that increases the blocks on 2 megabytes, and it brings segregated witness, which is a security improvement on how signatures are managed in the blockchain. But Segwit 2x got called off. Finally, the pressure from the community, from the crypto trolls on social media, and everyone involved with this economy convinced the largest corporations that were pushing for this change to back off. The corporations needed it because they are the ones dealing with the support tickets, the customer support tickets, and they are dealing, with the bottlenecks on the Bitcoin transactions, and of course they need scalability. But if reaching scalability of a censorship-resistant technology is achieved by a few people making an agreement in New York, that goes totally counter the spirit of the kind of freedom that these networks need to protect. So it was very good news in my view. I try to be neutral on Twitter because you have to be open-minded, but I kind of celebrated that the fork got called off. But the interesting thing was what happened 5 days after that, on that weekend. And things happen during weekends because that's when the regulators are sleeping. So during weekends, people do very weird trades. And the weekend next, after the fork got called off, we saw this massive pump of Bitcoin Cash. The Chinese are doing something. What wasn't that commented was that at the same time, there was a response from Bitcoin Gold, which is a very weird fork that changes the mining process from using ASICs, which is what the miners use, to using GPUs, graphical processing units. ASICs, 70% of the ASIC hardware is controlled by Bitmain, a Chinese company. 70% of the GPUs are controlled by NVIDIA, an American corporation. So when the Bitcoin Cash pump happened, suddenly the Bitcoin Gold pump also happened. And it looks to me like it's two pointing guns. You know, Bitcoin Gold is pointing a gun to Bitcoin Cash, saying we can mine with GPUs. And Bitcoin Cash is trying to get control of Bitcoin by bring the whole narrative on increasing the bandwidth of transactions. So we are seeing these attempts to control the forks no longer through FUD and bad headlines and bad publicity. Already, JP Morgan made us a lot of favors this year, talking, Jamie Dimon talking bad about Bitcoin. Thank you, Jamie. Keep doing your role. You're the perfect Lex Luthor for this industry. But those things no longer have an impact. When Jamie Dimon and the Chinese banks in the same week started giving very bad publicity to Bitcoin, the price went down, but the next week was already at the same level. Now it's like 5 times above that. So the attempts to control seem to be with competing technologies that have different dynamics. So it's really important to pay attention. And what I honestly believe is that the most important attribute that we need to protect as a community is to guarantee that these technologies stay censorship resistant, stay beyond the control of any single actor, whether good or bad. And that's the real fight. So what we're learning now is that the challenge of blockchains is not about energy. I think that there's an extraordinary opportunity about looking into the very nature of energy. I have a friend of mine, Andrew DeSantis, who even argues that the increase in mass and energy that we're perceiving in the Bitcoin blockchain can be described as gravity. We are like in the brink of understanding new properties of gravity if we start looking into the quantum properties of the Bitcoin network. DeSantis is a bit crazy, but I encourage you to follow him on Twitter. But the challenge is about governance. And governance, when you scratch into the human stories behind every blockchain, Bitcoin is very public, but in every blockchain project, you will find these struggles and interests and conflicts related to the power and the money and basically the drama of humanity. So we need to figure out how to address the governance of these kind of technologies. What is governance? To me, is answering this question, because this is the most pressing thing when you look into the real variables behind all the big problems that we see in the world. The big problems that we see in the world: climate change, refugees, terrorism. Ultimately, I related by the fact that humanity skyrocketed in the last century and nothing seems to be stopping how many of us are going to be on this planet. Some folks are doing a Noah's Ark to Mars, Elon's Ark. I think that's super cool, but still we have to figure out how we take care of everyone in the planet. And governments and nation states seem to be limited in their ability to cooperate and to scale when it comes to very pressing issues to the planet. So how do we make sure that we include everyone? That's the main question that is driving us at Democracy Earth. And we know it's incredibly crazy to think about democracy in the context of 10 billion people by the end of the century, but someone has to engage in that kind of conversation. The interesting thing is that we have the technology. Facebook reaches 2 billion people. So we can project that. And when you compare Facebook to other large entities like the Chinese government, 1.2 billion people, or the Islamic religion, like 1.6 billion people, Facebook is larger than that. And it's distributed across the whole planet. So we need to understand what it means for the internet to start becoming not just entertainment and culture and ways of subverting the American election, but actually becoming a government. So what's state of the art regarding governance? What's the best that we have related to governance in civilization? We're between two worlds. The world of the land, the world of atoms, of matter, is basically the world of those who are able to monopolize force, the armies, the nation states. They are the ones who control our bodies, who control our physical presence and our ability to move freely across the planet. If you have a visa, you can come into this country. If you don't have a visa, then you are not able to freely move in the planet you were born. So this is the world that we have inherited, the world of the land. At the same time, there's the world of the cloud, the world that tries to control our ideas, our information, our data. And these are data monopolies. And this is the handful of companies that Ben mentioned, largely Google and Facebook, which are advertising companies. 97% of the revenue is advertising. And the business of advertising is telling us what to think, what to decide. The business of advertising is to control our thoughts. And they aim to profile us because in order to stay competitive in that market, they need to be the best big brother they can possibly build in order to get that extra buck in the conversion rates of the campaigns in AdWords and whatnot. So we are trapped, our bodies are trapped within the land, and our minds are trapped within the cloud. This is the context that where we're standing right now. In the land, democracy is broken. Voter participation has been going down in developed nations since the 1970s. Ever since then, across Europe and across the US, voter participation is really not there. When you look into the nature of these systems, traditional ballot voting cannot guarantee vote integrity. It can guarantee a great degree of secrecy, but the integrity of our vote is not guaranteed. It's the year 2017, and the minute you put your vote in a ballot box, you really have no guarantee if your vote was counted the right way, if your vote was manipulated in any way, and if it reached the final tally. You have no guarantee. You are trusting on good faith that the system somehow works. And in many places, it's really violent. So the quality of the technology being used for voting, it's questionable. There's lack of transparency, Donald Trump, stuff like that. And in the cloud, which the two worlds we're now realizing after last year's election are very connected, very intertwined, the cloud is also broken. They centralize our data. We don't own our information. It's stored in clusters that belong to centralized companies. We don't own our identity. Technically, Mark Zuckerberg can impersonate 2 billion people if he ever wanted to, because we're using Facebook Connect to authenticate to any website. That means that Facebook is a liability in the sense that it can't represent any of its users if it ever wanted to. They are focused on farming our attention for no real purpose other than increasing their advertising dollars, and they are monetizing on our behalf. So these two things seem to be broken, and they're actually very connected. Facebook was used for the Arab Spring. Months before the Arab Spring happened, the largest telco company in Egypt included Facebook by default on every smartphone device they were selling. Next thing you know, a Facebook page of wild gunning in the protest goes like wildfire in Egypt, and everyone knows the outcome of that story. There was a lot of hope, and then things go crazy again. Voids of power get filled very, very fast. But then the Trojan horse exploded at home. Nobody saw the ability of Russians or Congress is trying to figure that out, but the idea of targeting advertising on specific regions with fake news and using the algorithms for the machine to explode in the very home that created it is actually, from a political perspective, an extremely interesting maneuver. So now Congress is debating what's going on with Facebook, what's going on with advertisers. How could you not tell that advertisers were paying with Russian rubles, and they're scratching their head around it. And I think that it's already too late to fix Facebook. So we've been involved, Democracy Earth, on hacking governance since 2012. And I'll give you guys a brief introduction of our history. In 2012, we started a political party in Argentina that had one very simple idea. Our candidates are committed to vote in Congress always according to what citizens decide online. That's it. It's a Trojan horse party. We literally built a Trojan horse. And we went through the streets of Buenos Aires with a huge Trojan horse, and people were saying, what the fuck is that? It's a Trojan horse. And people came and took selfies with the Trojan horse, and we were able to demonstrate during the campaign that we were not just nerds on Twitter, that we had presence in the streets, and we knew our Greek myths. And it was a really great tactic. If anyone's thinking about doing a political party, do the Trojan horse. Seriously, and do a political party. It's a lot of fun, let me tell you that. And our party started building open source software for democratic participation. We started exploring on the idea, what's the right kind of software to guarantee that the votes are trusted, that there's no single point of failure that can manipulate the votes. A lot of incredible stories about the experience of starting a party. I met so many people, so many good friends that came to this in love with the cause of something that is different, not from the cliches of the left and the cliches of the right that are so boring, really. This is talking about, they call us like millennial generation. I still consider myself a millennial, even though I'm 34. But we're really the internet generation. We are the first generation that grew up and got educated on the internet. And the generations that are coming next to us, they are completely different kind of human, even. So, I'm talking to you, Roma. That's what's going on. It's not millennials. Millennials, the boomers call us that. But politics, it's really fucked up. Just one story about this. When I was in France for a conference, I started getting these threats on Twitter, a lunatic guy that has been bothering me since forever. And I decided to give the guy a call. This was a guy that was coming to our party meetings and always sabotaging the meetings. He came to the meetings with two friends, and they started saying, you're full of shit, and they started like, no, we had to kick them out many times. And then he continued on Twitter, then I blocked him, and then he started trolling every single follower that was replying me, and it was like, it never stopped. Like, the guy's job was to troll me 24/7, for real. So one day I'm in France, I'm fed up, I cannot take it anymore, and I give the guy a call. And I start talking with him. And I'm like, dude, what can I do? Do you want us to meet? Let's have a coffee, let's chat. I'm no weirdo, I'm really passionate about what we're doing. You should meet, like the people, And in the middle of the conversation, he had a technique to talk to me. His technique was talking shit to me and then praising me. And then talking shit to me and then praising me. And he was driving me crazy until at a certain point said, what do you want? Oh, just put $1 million on the name of this judge and you will get the rights to a party next year when the elections happen. And he gave me the name of the judge. And that was my reaction in that moment was like, what the hell are you talking about? I hung up the phone. It took me 3 days to realize that I had an open door towards bribing a federal judge in my country and run for elections. When the 2015 elections happened, there was a party, there were 18 parties running on the presidential election. 6 parties are really relevant. The other parties are like comedy stand-up. But among those parties, there was one that took 0.1% of the votes that had among the candidates this guy. So that was proof to me that he actually had the rights to a party, and he could give me the party if I bribe a judge, and the judge, writes the papers. So that's when you started to understand that you are fighting corruption, and you are fighting a rotten culture that is very nasty and that drives the incentives of the best players in that game to end up becoming what they were always hated. And I know this firsthand. When I was a candidate of my own party, I was also tempted with this poison that enters through your ears. People come and tell you, you're going to be the president of the country, you're the best. And you start believing it. That's when it gets, you start being possessed, like your ego starts doing this coup d'etat in your mind, and you start like, oh, maybe I was born to be the president of Argentina. How depressing is that? Well, it is really depressing. Really depressing. But Pia knows this, Pia lived through this. For a full 10 days, I was kind of in exercised in a way. I needed to be exercised, and finally, someone, Pia and my good friends of the party convinced me to think better. But in hindsight, you through these experiences, you understand how weird politics can be and how that game is really not worth pursuing. You really cannot change the system from within. The system will change you first. It's that strong because it has that power legacy of history. And we are humans, and we are vain and limited in many ways. So that's politics. So a miracle happened in 2015. Y Combinator, I'm a nerd. I've been programming since I was 9 years old. I love computers. I've been on the internet since my teenage years. And when Y Combinator noticed us, it was like, holy shit, I'm such a big fan of Paul Graham and the Silicon Valley culture, the California way of looking at the world, which is pretty cool. And they invited us to start a nonprofit. And that's where we started the Democracy Earth Foundation. And we started looking into the challenge of democracy from a completely new perspective. Instead of changing the system from within, we went full-on Bucky Fuller, and we are building a new model that makes the existing model obsolete. Bucky Fuller, great architect from the 60s, a bit crazy, but had this romantic vision of the future that I think describes a lot of the good ideas that we learned to love from Silicon Valley, from San Francisco, and that is this incredible mixture of the whole Earth mentality, the end of the outside. We are all one, and we were really inspired by that, mostly because I got the domain democracy.earth gifted by a friend, and I thought it was super cool. So a lot of the ideas that I'm going to introduce today are described in our paper, the Social Smart Contract. And this is a living paper. We did the 0.1 release on September. A 0.2 release is coming very, very soon, where our ideas are evolving as more people are joining in our GitHub repo and in our Slack channel. But in the Social Smart Contract, we're really trying to explore in every possible way what it means to build a democracy for the information age, what it means to build a democracy that recognizes no frontiers, and how we can harness the incredible opportunity that we have with these rising new technologies that are censorship resistant and can really shape how we connect to society on a local and on a global scale. So the problem is basically it has three big parts: identity, representation, which we can consider democracy, and voting, what we can consider related to the economics of it. And we kind of explore the idea of liquidity, as in universal basic income, the access to participate as a human right, not the access to participate because you have a lot of computers in order to process the blocks. So identity, representation, and voting. That's what we're trying to figure out. And I'll go give you 3 examples of each, very, very tangible, hopefully. Identity today in the land and the cloud we go from using passports to access one piece of land or the other, one piece of sovereign land to the other piece of sovereign land, and passwords to access our information stored in a set of servers in the cloud or the other set of servers in the cloud. So passports and passwords are centralized solutions, and there's a lot of interesting innovations happening regarding the decentralized management of identity. There are great startups. Consensus is working with the UPort protocol. Blockstack, a fantastic startup here in New York. Blockstack is really looking into the problem, has been looking into identity for 5 years now, and they're extremely savvy about the key management side of things. The interesting thing when you look into identity in the prism of democracy and governance is that for computers, identity is nothing but a pointer in memory. What we need to really make sure is that if we are authenticating and validating humans, that we don't use only computation, but we also use attention. That's the resource. We need to start using our attention, not for CryptoKitties and clicking stuff on Facebook, but a little bit of attention to validate this emergent web of trust. Who is actually who? And it's really important for democracy that we put some effort on really keeping an identity index, decentralized identity index, where the participants, we make sure they are human, because AIs are coming, and that there are no duplicates or replicants or bots or one person controlling the keys of multiple identities. So we need to figure out that proof of identity protocol in a way that really uses our conscious attention. Because the boundary, the only political boundary of the 21st century is going to be the boundary between us and the machines, between the human consciousness and the artificial intelligence. And if we want to be in charge, and that's hopefully the desire of a democracy, then we need to figure out a proof of identity protocol. What do we mean by this? In our paper, I am this guy. I am the blockchain dad, according to CoinDesk. And I really love it. Being the blockchain dad is the coolest thing after being the blockchain baby, which is Roma is over there. When Roma was born, she's now looking into video games, hopefully. When Roma was born, I did this little experiment. I'm gonna, oh yeah, Pia is gonna be, don't look at Pia. There is Pia, there is, okay. That's Roma. So this video file, the day after Roma was born, I made this video. This is an idea given to me by Ryan Shea of Blockstack. So kudos to Ryan. 1 week before Roma was born, we were drunk in a bar, and he said, "You should do this." And I said, "Okay, all good. It's the best idea ever." And so kudos to Ryan for giving me the idea. Great guy, the founder of Blockstack. So I shot this video. This is a digital video file. I'm showing the birth certificate of Roma. I'm using my mother and my mother-in-law as witnesses. And I use this digital file, and I hash the video. I generate a hash using a service called Proof of Existence, developed by my friend Manu Arauz of Zeppelin. And with that hash, it's encoded in a Bitcoin transaction. And when that transaction is in a block in the blockchain, then I can use this video and verify it against the Bitcoin blockchain. And I will be absolutely sure that no content of this video has been corrupted, and that video was at least shot any time before the moment that it's present on the blockchain. So effectively, this video is a certificate, and it's a video certificate that I did in a self-sovereign way. In the video, I ended declaring Roma a citizen of Earth. It's my human right as her parent to welcome her to the planet and give her a citizenship that knows no boundaries, because there are no bosses in this planet. And it's a very nice thing for her to have. She will realize when she grows up and checks her Twitter feed, all the weirdos, like, oh yeah, this is super cool, man. How do you hash it? She will understand. There's Roma there. So Roma, according to some scholars, is like the first citizen of the blockchain. So it was a very nice one. And when we talk about proof of identity, it's not the idea of doing this process with a killer app that overtakes the market. It's the idea of doing this through available tools to anyone. We hopefully need to improve the UX and simplify the process and make it easier to understand for average Joe and everyone on the planet. Then, there is a roadmap ahead. But the idea of simply being able to generate this proof with easily available tools, with a smartphone and just some proper understanding of how these technologies work. So that's our take on identity. And the idea of using video is because video is hard for an artificial intelligence to process, but not for a human. So if we want to use attention in the validating process, video uses high bandwidth, requires human brains. AIs, they still struggle with video. You need a lot of computation for an AI to work like Terminator. So I like the idea of using video, but of course, it's a growing problem as technology advances. The other aspect is representation. Okay, representation. We have top-down representation. If you think that you choose the president, you are wrong. The president is chosen by the party authorities, and among a pool of 300 million citizens, it's only like the 0.40 and 8% of the population that gets to pick the next president. And then it gets legitimized by society. It gets legitimized with our vote. So it's a top-down approach. And in the kind of representation we have in the internet right now is basically avatars and weird people on the internet. What we're looking into is the idea of bottom-up representation. The idea of being able to allocate trust among the people we already know and trust, the people that are our family, our colleagues, or anyone that is close to our social graph. So here we explore the idea of liquid democracy, which is this hybrid model where you can vote directly on issues or delegate your voting power to someone you already know and trust. There have been some attempts at doing liquid democracy applications. The pilot party did something called liquid feedback many years ago. It ended up with the linguist in charge of neutralizing the proposals dominating most of the delegations, so it was effectively a monopoly. Then Google did internal research on something. There's a paper called Google Votes, and it ended up with very few people delegating, and so it was mostly a direct democracy. We do mention these experiences in our paper. We have actually researched it along with, in the case of Google, we have done research with them. But there are many interesting rules that come from economists that have been studying political currencies and political economy that can help really incentivize the system for maintaining the legitimacy and keeping it based on facts and not a political charade. So that's what we're aiming. That's what we're trying to benchmark ourselves. A system that is able to be high in legitimacy and driven by facts, not promises. And then there's voting. In traditional systems, we have ballot boxes and authorities count the votes. At the end of the day, we delegate in the authorities, in the party authorities, in the government authorities, who is the actual winner. And we have really no clarity in the understanding of what happened with our vote once we voted. Corporations run servers that process likes. But in blockchains, an interesting property emerges for democracy. And it's that it's permissionless to count the votes. Because the votes are stored in a public shared ledger, then every voter, by default, gets the right to become an auditor of the election and scrutinize the system without having to have any special access or special rights or being in the bed with the party authorities. So this property really breaks one of the centralization points of any democracy as we have known them today. And it's an ability to decentralize what gives legitimacy to the democratic process, which is the guaranteeing that the vote counting is fair. So this is a very interesting emergent property when you think about democracies with these technologies. So voting is actually the main interaction we have with the internet every day. We go to the internet to vote every day. When we put likes, we are voting. When we do retweets, we are voting. When we put hearts on Instagram, we are voting. Upvotes on Reddit, we are voting. It's, these little clicks we make every day are all about democracy, but they're ultimately based on for optimizing the filtering and the editorial algorithms of these companies. They are not based for any institutional change. No matter how many likes on Facebook, if they will not impact directly the institutions. They will impact them indirectly and put Donald Trump as president. But, okay, I will stop criticizing Trump. Do I have battery? Oh yeah, I'm gonna plug. Okay, just real quick here, so I don't have to restart the thing. There we go. Boom. Okay, you're not shutting me down, Uncle Sam. Okay, the thing won't go. Okay. Not charging. Okay, so can someone plug that? That's not plugged. Okay. There we go. Thanks, guys. There we go. So we're voting every day on the internet, and this is something new. This is something we're starting to work. We have been researching about this for a year now, and this idea of disrupting the Facebook Live, figuring out how to make a cryptocurrency for political economies, a cryptocurrency for voting, changing the concept of the live from something that can actually trigger institutional impact. And if we're able to generate a token that is used for democratic governance or for democratic decision-making of any kind, that is able to trigger cryptocurrency transactions or smart contracts that enforce decisions, then we have a technology for governance that is post-nation state. And we are in the process of starting to build this vote token that we want it also to be a token that is able to work with any blockchain-based network that is relevant. We are obviously thinking it as an ERC20 token on the Ethereum blockchain, but we might as well think about figuring out a way of integrating this with Lightning Network and with some of the many interesting innovations that are in the roadmap for these technologies. And properly figure out what's the right way where users can engage with these technologies in a simplified form that they know how to use on a daily basis, and that can help improve the protocols, whatever protocol they use for keeping their assets and for transacting and for doing generating value for the world. So we are building Sovereign, and I'm going to demo you really quick Sovereign. Sovereign has been under development for 2 years. And the idea is to build a solution that goes from the pixel in your screen to the transaction in the blockchain and to the full stack implementation that gives you a social media-like experience, but where the votes can trigger institutional outcomes for any organization that wants to engage with this kind of governance. It's a token-based liquid democracy platform. That's the way we view it. But we want to make sure that it's able to run on any device, mobile and desktop. So I preloaded some screens here, knowing that demos always fail. Okay, good. There's a lot of people having birthdays today for some reason. If you're one of them, happy birthday to you. Thank you for coming here. We'll have a drink later. So we're still in alpha, which is codename for we have a lot of bugs. But it's still, it's a product that can still kind of run in production. And we did a silent release. Guess it's not that silent anymore within our community to start testing it out and understand how the technology can work and what's the right interface for doing a democracy with tokens and that it's liquid. So here's a version of the product that, interestingly, the users are discussing features for the product. So that's really, really, really good. This user is suggesting a lot of features. But it's a Twitter-like experience. Okay, it's loading stuff. Where I can vote on something. I can say, okay, I like this.
And here I can say I will delegate some votes. I will not delegate. I will put some votes on this, and I'll say yes. I'll give you 140 of my votes. Well, maybe not now, but you get the idea. I have a basic set of tokens. I have almost like 4,000 tokens here. 68% of my votes are cast. All the decisions in the system are always on. They have no closing dates. This is a design decision. Why it's always on? Because it gives me the ability to override my vote later, and that fights coercion. That makes the system a real-time system that brings a lot of interesting properties. We did originally polls with closing dates, but as we studied the system more, we figured always-on decisions, real-time democracy, and the ability to always have the final word regarding how you feel about something, and building like your political statements by allocating this token on decisions looks like a very interesting outcome for us as we research the application. And here on the left, I have my delegates, the people that I have delegated votes to, and here's the rest of the people that are in this organization. For instance, I can check here my friend Virgil from Paris. He's part of Democracy Earth. And here I can see who has delegated votes to Virgil and who Virgil has delegated votes to. If I look into profiles, I can see that I delegated 300 and something votes to Vir, and I can delegate some votes more because I really like this guy, and I delegate. And that's it. And Vir has now more, is more accountable to me, so I hope he doesn't make any weird decisions. This is the first release of Sovereign. It has been under development for 2 years. And of course, it's entirely available on GitHub. On GitHub, you can check the Sovereign repo. We are constantly contributing to it. I am, on a daily basis, try to at least contribute or push some new code to it. We are finishing the integration with Blockstack right now for identity, which is really cool. And we have a roadmap ahead. We want to figure out how to integrate it with Lightning Network, how to integrate it with IPFS, how to make a client with Electron. There are many challenges regarding building the technology, but this is the main app that we have been working at Democracy Earth. So if we're able to figure out a decentralized index of self-sovereign identities, then that information is the backbone where we can start building on top of that 2 killer applications. One is the killer application of universal basic income on a global scale. Because what you want to make sure on UBI is to guarantee that there's not a person getting more than its fair share of liquidity. And from a democratic perspective, guaranteeing liquidity to participants helps the democracy to not be run by financial interests. The other killer application of a decentralized self-sovereign index of identities is democracy itself. And they are the two very much interconnected in our view. Liquid democracy really means liquidity in the sense of how folks in the UBI world are thinking about it. And democracy means this historical pursuit of history of empowering people. So we are looking into the dynamics of these two things, and they are very well described in our paper. At least we try to. So our next step is we need to grow as a global organization. And we are doing an ICO to start a movement around a borderless democracy. We want to start a movement that is able to bring this kind of power to everyone. And again, our mission is to include everyone. And by everyone, we mean everyone, no exceptions. So we are looking at this from a human rights perspective. And the challenge we know is very big, and we cannot do it on our own. So we need to make this a movement. We need to make this something that goes out of control, something that makes me personally totally irrelevant to the project, because it needs to be something that is pursued by a generation across the whole planet. Our token dynamics, we try to be very clear about it in the sense that we are locking funds for the foundation on the long term, on the sense that we are providing incentives for investors to participate, but you can look more into the details, and we are still, figuring this stuff out on ico.democracy.earth. If you want to participate on this, just give your email on ico.democracy.earth, and we'll be more than happy to share you all the details of how we're thinking about this as an organization. We are already a very big team. Yesterday, actually, we announced yesterday our ambassadors program. We already have an ambassador in the UK who gave an extraordinary TED Talk at TEDx in Birmingham, Sani Sanga. We already have we have an ambassador in Colombia who helped us to implement the first pilot of sovereign on the Colombian referendum on the peace agreement last year, and gave us very interesting results. We published the information about that first pilot we did in Colombia. We are already, we are a distributed team that has presence in 11 countries right now, and we need to be on every country, in every city, and the governance of our organization is the very software that we're building. We need to be our own staff. Otherwise, it's not working. So we need to commit to understand how this technology actually works, and figure out the way to scale governance, so we no longer depend on a narcissist guy using very weird hairdos. So our community is growing. You can follow me on Twitter and Democracy Earth as well. We have a lot of posts on Medium, on GitHub. We keep a lot of activity. If you are not technical on GitHub, the whole paper is available on GitHub. And we are needing a lot of help translating the paper, improving and polishing the ideas of the paper, bringing some more mathematics to some of the modeling we have done in the paper. So please, the best way to contribute and to work with us is directly check out the stuff that we put on GitHub. And on Slack, we spend a lot of time talking with the community there. We've been very lucky to get support from some very, very notorious organizations in different ways. Y Combinator, the TED conference, MIT, which I mentioned. So that helps us at least get good advice as an organization. And as a final note, I'm not talking necessarily about direct democracy, representative democracy. I'm talking about democracy, period. And democracy is always a work in progress. If democracy was an absolute idea, it would be a totalitarian ideology like every other political idea out there. Democracy is the one exception. It's the decision system about how we make decisions. And in that sense, it's a constant effort, and it requires practice, and it requires a lot of learning and a lot of listening, not just talking. And in these 5 years, we learned a lot. It has been an incredible journey, but it's still the beginning. And we're really aiming to think about the very, very long term, because we have no other option left. We have to take care of the planet, we have to take care of life, and we have to guarantee that humanity, and make sure that humanity can do better, and it will do better. You may say, I'm a dreamer, but I'm not the only one. Thank you.